The man who united all Muslims against Russian imperialism that you've never heard about. The number of sources regarding Sheikh Mansur, also known as Mansur Shoma, is limited. However, it is suggested that he was most likely born in 1760 to a middle-class family in Aldi, Chechnya. It is presumed that around 1778 he enrolled at madrasa in Dagestan. Historically, the North Caucasus region has been vital for many empires due to its close proximity to the Caspian and Black Sea, as Persians, Russians and Ottomans have all fought for control over the area. The first major conflict between the Russians and the people of the Caucasus region was in 1722, in which Russian cavalry was sent to occupy the village of Endiri, located on the Aktash River in eastern Chechnya. This became known as the Battle of Endiri, in which the Chechens emerged victorious, meanwhile the Russian forces retreated. Meanwhile, at the same time, due to the fall of the Safavid Empire, Baku and Derbent came under Russian jurisdiction. It is suggested that the Russians took control with ease due to the fact that the people of Dagestan and Azerbaijan were divided among many rival polities that were unable to unite against a common enemy. The first permanent success was when Russia won a war in the Caucasus between 1735 to 1739, in which they attacked the banks of the Kuban River. As a result, the Ottoman Empire lost and had to recognize the independence of Kabardia through the Treaty of Belgrade of 1739. Furthermore, Tsar Catherine constructed a fort in the town of Mozdok in 1763, which was located in eastern Circassia. This continued in the early 1780s, in which the Russians had followed a policy of aggressive pressure on Chechnya. It was also noted that the Russians had conducted massacres on the Nogais. As a result, the Russian encroachment led to the emergence of Sheikh Mansur, the first man to unite the Muslims of the Caucasus against the Russians. His sudden appearance remains a mystery. However, some sources suggest that he was an Italian by the name of Giovanni Battista Boetti from Monferrato, in which he settled in the Kurdistan region, a part of the Ottoman Empire, and subsequently became a Muslim. However, this claim is weak. Rather, the story goes that he was a Chechen who rose to prominence after he saw a vision of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in which he believed this dream gave him authority to assume a jihad against the Russians. Already in 1784, he took the title of Imam of all Caucasus mountaineers, which would allow him to unite the various Muslim ethnic groups in the North Caucasus. And in the following year, in 1785, Mansur began to preach publicly for the eradication of all pre-Islamic practices, the replacement of customary law with Sharia, and a holy war against the Russians. Mansur also claimed that the Muslims should not be treated by Russian doctors, as this could eventually lead them to befriending the enemies. He also tried to convince the Caucasus tribes that the only chance of success against Russian imperialism was through unity. His pan-Islamic preaching led him to attract a sizable following of Chechens and Dagestanis, due to his charisma in uniting the Muslims under one banner. Furthermore, many religious and political leaders in the Caucasus region followed suit. As he gained popularity, his influence and support increased to the English, the Circassians and Ossetians. On the 8th of March 1785, the first report on Mansur was drafted by General Putling. Added, General Matsey, the commander of Vladikavkaz, stated that Mansur was in search of allies, in which he communicated with Kopalov, a Kumuk prince, and Dolmuradov, a Kabardian noble. He also formed an allegiance with the Avar Khan of Dagestan. It is also noted he established contact with the Ottomans, however they rebuffed his calls. Furthermore, it was reported that Imam Mansur was planning a campaign against the neighbouring Kabardia for it to submit to Islamic rule, in which it was noted that he was gaining popularity amongst the natives of the region. This also extended to those in Chechnya, Dagestan and the Kumuk inhabited regions, leading to Pavel Potemkin threatening the people of Chechnya and Kumuk regarding Mansur. Furthermore, the Ottoman Empire were uncomfortable with Mansur, as this would increase tensions between them and Russia. This is due to the fact that after the Treaty of Kukuk-Kainark, they lost Crimea. Hence, the Ottomans had no desire to get involved in another conflict with Russia, preferring to preserve the status quo. Therefore, they wanted to keep North Caucasus groups, such as the Circassians, away from conflict. And on the 7th of May, 1785, Grigory Potemkin ordered Pavel Potemkin to capture Mansur. Potemkin estimated that the number of rebels numbered at 10,000 fighters. Meanwhile, the Russians had a garrison of 27,000 men in the Caucasus region. And on the 6th of June 1785, Pavel Potemkin sent General Pieri with 7,000 men to capture Mansur. Though when Pieri's men arrived, Mansur stated that they were not at war with the Russians because he had no permission from the Ottoman government to do so, but added if they do not retreat and continue impeding, war will be unavoidable, leading to the first major battle between Mansur and the Russians, in which it took place on the 26th of June 1785 in Aldi, in which General Pierre burnt down the villages. Initially, the Chechens suffered heavy casualties, with one of them being Mansur's brother. However, Mansur took command and cornered the Russian army, with almost 300 Russians being killed, in which one of those were General Pieri. The Russians were compelled to retreat to the river Manish, and all their equipment, including artillery, was seized by Mansur. Upon emerging victorious, his popularity surged, leading to an uptake in followers, especially those in Dagestan and Chechnya. This became a holy war, also known as a jihad, against the Russians impeding from the north. Furthermore, this prompted a series of revolts across the North Caucasus region in late 1785, as people from Dagestan and Kabardia took part in their own insurgencies, motivated by the pan-Muslim identity. Due to these skirmishes, tensions between the Russians and the Ottomans increased. Mansur's next target was Kislar, in which he subsequently commenced an attack on the well-fortified town on the 5th of July 1785. However, due to having insufficient forces, he failed to achieve any major success. This was exacerbated by the arrival of Cossack reinforcements. Although he managed to capture one of the outer defences of the fortress, he had to retire, due to suffering heavy casualties after the Cossacks attacked him from the rear. And a few weeks later, on the 26th of July 1785, Mansur and Dolmuradov organized a new attack on the Russians, in which a combined 15,000 fighters attacked Kumkelesi. However, this resulted in failure for Mansur, who ultimately retreated. He then returned to Kislar and besieged the town between the 19th to the 22nd of August. However, he once again failed. Russian military superiority and the lack of military discipline among Mansur's men were the major reasons for this loss. After his second failure at Kislar, Mansur sought support for a struggle against the Russians from the Muslim world and particularly the Ottoman Empire. Thus, in the summer of 1785, Bolat Khan, with the help of Tatars, went to the Hejaz to seek support. The messengers also reached Anatolia, and in a relatively short time, Mansur received positive responses from there. For example, Mehmed Riza, a notable from Sivas, and Sayyid Halil Effendi, a notable from Gaziantep, and his 200 followers joined Mansur's forces to fight the Russians in 1785. During September and October 1785, the English and the Ossetians began attacking Russian fortifications near Vladikavkaz in support for Mansur. By the end of October 1785, Mansur yet again suffered another defeat at the Battle of Malka, in which his rebels were no match for the 6,000-strong army under Pavel Potemkin. However, the Ottomans remained suspicious of Mansur and stayed aloof. His rise in popularity in Anatolia and among the ranks and files of the army in the Caucasus helped dissuade the Ottomans from their suspicions. As a result, Ghazi Hassan Pasha was sent to collect information on the Chechen leader for the Ottoman hierarchy, in which he reported to the government of Istanbul that Mansur emerged victorious in both battles. He added that Mansur had nothing against the interests of the Ottoman Empire in the Caucasus region, as well as the fact that he was ready to fight under the Ottomans against the Russians. Despite this, there was a lack of consensus regarding Mansur. One such example was when Hassan revolted because of a disagreement with Bikar Zandi Ali Pasha, as he wanted to give the artillery in and the Sujuk fought to Mansur. However, Bekazand Ali Pasha, who replaced Ferah Ali Pasha in October 1785, arrested him and had him beheaded. It is also suggested that Sahingirai, the last Khan of the Crimean Khanate, was given permission to go to Constantinople to convince the Ottomans to not unite with Mansur. Added, there were some concerns that Mansur could switch the allegiances of the Caucasian tribes in that they followed his lead first, though he and the Ottomans did have the same goal of expelling Russian presence from the Caucasus region. And in the following month, on the 2nd of November 1785, Mansur yet again lost to the Russians at the Battle of Tartarup. Mansur's forces were routed, in which he escaped to the Ottoman fortress of Anapa. Meanwhile, the Kumyks returned to their homeland, leading to General Bulgakov demanding the Porte to punish the Lezgins and recognize Russian suzerainty over Karti-Keketi. However, the Grand Vizier Koka Yusuf Pasha ignored the Russian demands and declared that the Ottomans would support Mansur and his Lezgi followers. Due to another loss, Mansur's support diminished, as well as the fact that many nobles deserted him. Meanwhile, at the same time, unable to capture Mansur, Pavel Potemkin put a price of 300 rubles on the Sheikh's head, either dead or alive. The following year, the second phase began, and it is noted by January 1786, the entire Caucasus was engulfed in uprisings. He continued preaching against the Russians, in which he encouraged raids against the Russians and Cossack settlements, as Mansur managed to capture Alexandrovskaya and a few other fortifications in Kabardia. This allowed for the Ottomans to communicate easier within the region due to broken Russian influence. In the Kuban area, Mansur's forces occupied Boldarovskaya and destroyed 4 stanitsas, which were Cossack settlements. The Russians retreated along the Maya River and left the area. Meanwhile, at the end of July 1786, 4,000 Russian troops under Larion Nagel were sent to Kabardia to prevent the English from supporting the Mansur movement. Dolmoradov responded by gathering an army. However, when he realized it was much smaller in comparison to the Russians, he fled to the mountains, in which he later surrendered and subsequently got captured. This proved costly, as he was released on the conditions that he would never take up arms against the Russians again. Furthermore, some English and Kabardian princes switched their allegiances to the Russians to fight Mansur. Despite this, the resistance leader continued his raids towards the Kuban, and in one case, 200 Russian soldiers were captured with their commander. However, the Russians were able to turn the tide on him, as Mansur escaped to the Ottoman fortress of Anapa. He was soon leading attacks on the Russian stanitsas once again, with his followers this time being mainly Circassians. In one of these raids, they got close to the capital city of the Don Cossacks, Cherkessk. They completely destroyed the Cossack administration along the Yei River and the fort of Boldirev. Mansur's success impressed Istanbul, in which they learned that the Circassians and Abbasids began conducting raids. According to historian Bening Sen, in October 1786, Mansur sent his father-in-law to Potemkin to offer a peace treaty. However, Potemkin insisted on unconditional surrender. In the following year, on the 17th of January 1787, a major Russian army under Colonel Savelyev entered Chechen territories. In the Battle of Kalchkalikov, Mansur ambushed his army with his cavalry, but had to retire, in which 2 days later, Colonel Retinder once again commenced a Russian offensive which ravaged parts of the Chechen plain and burnt down several villages, as a result of which about 80 people were killed and 4 people were captured. Sheikh Mansur was not just a military commander, but also a religious leader, as he led an invasion on the Karabuluk region, which encompasses modern-day Ingushetia and Chechnya. This is because they were not following Islam correctly. Therefore, in mid-June 1787, he sent an army of 1,000 soldiers to occupy it. Mansur managed to occupy some Karabulak villages, despite meeting fierce resistance from the locals. The Karabulaks then called for Russian help, and after the arrival of Russian troops, Mansur's small militia was forced to retreat. Meanwhile, sometime in 1787, rumors spread amongst the Crimean Tatars that Mansur was on his way to the peninsula, in which it was believed that he would deliver the Crimean Khanate from Russian rule. Though, due to the increase of Russian presence within Karti saw the rise in tension amongst them and the Ottomans. Furthermore, the Ottomans demanded for the Russians to leave Crimea. This eventually led to the Russians declaring war on the Ottoman Empire on the 19th of August 1787. This began the third and final phase of his insurgency, and it is noted at the same time the Circassians pledged their full allegiance to Mansur, in which he also sent letters to the Ottoman government expressing his enthusiasm and pleasure and promising his full support. The outbreak of the war galvanized Sheikh Mansur as he moved from his home territory of Chechnya to Againt. Furthermore, he was able to turn them from nominal Muslims to devout adherents. And on the 20th of September 1787, the Russians began their campaign on the Ottoman fortress of Anapa, in which 8,000 Russian soldiers invaded Circassia. The capture of Anapa would enable the Russians to cut the main artery of the communications between the Ottomans and the Caucasian tribes, and significantly diminished Ottoman involvement in fighting there, which had become one of the most crucial fortresses across the region. And it is noted that Mansur was able to gather 10 to 11,000 Circassian, Nogai and Chechen fighters to repel the Russian attempts at capturing the forts. Despite suffering heavy casualties, the Circassians were able to defend their territory. However, on the following day, on the 21st of September, the Russian forces captured the camp. The final battle of the Anapa campaign commenced on the 25th of September 1787, with the Battle of the Kuban River taking place, in which Mansur had an estimated 300 to 400 fighters, in which they ambushed the Russian army, despite the fact that the mountaineers were poorly equipped, with many having bows and arrows rather than firearms, and after a 2-hour-long battle, Mansur decided to retreat. On the same day, General Ratiev received the order to withdraw from Circassia due to the heavy losses that the Russian army suffered during the campaign. Up to 200 people were killed, and several hundred were wounded, leading to the First Anapa campaign ending in defeat for the Russians. As a result, the Russians altered their focus towards Kabardia, beginning a new campaign on the 14th of October 1787. The following week, the Battle of the Kafar River began, with the Russian army just under 13,000 clashing with Mansur's 5,000 fighters. This ended in defeat for Mansur, who retreated to the Urup River. This subsequently led to another battle as General Tekeli sent a detachment under General Retiev to the river, while he himself went to the upper reaches of the Urup. It looked like Mansur was about to be captured, though he managed to reach the Turkish fortress of Suzuk Kale. As a result of this fight, over 300 Circassian villages were destroyed by the Russians, in which they failed to capture Mansur, who later rebuilt his army. And at the beginning of the following year, on the 4th of January 1788, Chechen fighters attacked the Novogladkovskaya state post office near Kislar, in which they captured the sergeant of the Kislar garrison battalion, Osipov, and 7 other Cossacks. This was done due to a letter sent by Mansur that motivated them to continue their campaign against the Russians. And in late 1788, the Russians began a second campaign on the Ottoman fortress of Anapa. The Russian forces, numbered to be at 17,000, began a siege on the area. It is estimated that Mansur's forces consisted of 12,000 stationed garrisons, as well as an additional 10,000 Circassian and Nogai fighters. The Russians began opening fire on Anapa. In the meantime, an Ottoman army, in which Mansur was a part of, left the fortress and launched a strong attack on the Russians, forcing them to retreat. Sometime later, the Caucasian corps arrived. The Russian troops wanted to storm Anapa. However, Tekeli refused and returned back to Russia. Sometime after, between 1789 to 1790, Mansur had tried to promote his interpretation of Islam among the Kazakhs and mobilized them to jointly attack Astrakhan, though by the beginning of 1790 he returned to Chechnya to renew the struggle in the eastern Caucasus region and Caspian Sea. The Russians continued in their aspirations of conquering Anapa, beginning a third campaign in February 1790. It is noted that Yuri Bibikov, commander of the 7,000 Caucasian Corps, intended to invade Circassia. However, his troops did not have the experience to fight in the harsh weather conditions, though upon hearing the news that the Anapa fortress only had 500 soldiers stationed, he began a campaign. However, they were repelled by ambushes and skirmishes led by Mansur. It looked like the Russians were gaining momentum as they defeated the joint Ottoman and Caucasus troops at the Shibza River in March. However, this feeling of victory was short-lived as they were again defeated in a second siege of Anapa. And by the end of the year, 30,000 soldiers composed of Turkish reinforcements as well as Mansur's Caucasian fighters had tried to invade Kabardia. However, at Toktamish, they were numerically inferior to the Russian army, and according to Badali and Benningsen, they were defeated. However, Mansur's luck was running out as he was captured in the fourth and final campaign on Anapa as a 20,000 strong army under the leadership of Ivan Godovich attacked the Ottoman fortress, and on the 18th of June 1791 they opened fire on Anapa, causing mass destruction. This led to the Ottoman general Mustafa Pasha seeking peace, though Mansur wanted to continue the resistance. And on the 21st of June, the Russian troops launched a heavy attack on a part of the fortress that was weakly defended and where the walls weren't as high. Afterwards, the Russian troops began climbing the walls and eventually occupied the bastion. Meanwhile, Mansur locked himself in a warehouse, refusing to surrender. He had no Murids left as they were all killed in battle. Having taken refuge in proximity to gunpowder, he continued firing at the Russians. Despite this, the Russians refused to storm the warehouse, in which Mansur even threatened to blow up the whole building. The Russians sent a Chechen negotiator to Mansur, promising him the position of an honorary prisoner and a decent content in St. Petersburg, where he should be sent to be presented to Empress Catherine II. The general also promised to grant him freedom as a prisoner of war immediately after the conclusion of a peace treaty with Turkey. However, Mansur refused to accept these terms and continued firing. In the end, he refused to blow up the building as he believed that would be suicide, which is strictly forbidden in Islam. He was soon after captured and sent to St. Petersburg, where he was sentenced to life in prison in the Schüsselburg fortress, and 3 years later he died there on the 13th of April 1794. His resistance led to thousands of Chechens fleeing the Caucasus region to Turkey, which has led to the biggest Chechen diaspora outside of Russia today. Mansur also left a great impact on the Muslims of the North Caucasus as he established a new direction in Islam, in which Sufi beliefs and practices were merged with jihad. He also established the foundations for the Imams of Chechnya and Dagestan in the early to mid-1800s, such as Imam Shamil, the last and most known anti-Russian insurgent leader.